Today, we are going to dive into a really remarkable personal story, one that reaches back nearly 200 years. We're looking at the life of Anna Auble, a woman who lived through some incredible change and hardship in the early days of America. Her story is it's a powerful look at what it truly means to endure.
And what better way to start than with her own words, right? This is how Anna began telling her story to her grandkids back in 1860. She's inviting them, and now she's inviting us, right into her world. It's like she's reaching across the centuries to tell us her story herself. And that really is the big question for us today. I mean, Anna's story isn't just some dusty piece of history. It's a masterclass in resilience. And you'll see that the lessons she learned are surprisingly and powerfully relevant to the challenges we all face in our own lives. Okay, let's get into it. So, Anna was born around 1787 in New Germantown, New Jersey. Now, just stop and think about that timing for a second. The American Revolution was still a fresh memory. The United States itself was this brand new, uncertain experiment, and Anna literally grew up right alongside it. This list, well, it paints a picture of a completely different world, doesn't it? A world of self-sufficiency. I mean, Anna's childhood wasn't about playdates and cartoons. It was about chores that were absolutely essential for survival. Making your own soap, spinning your own thread. This was just daily life. And, like a lot of early Americans, she grew up bilingual, speaking German at home with her family. But even with all that hard work, life happens. When she was 17, she met her future husband, John Auble. And there's just such a simple sweetness to how she describes it. No big romantic gestures, just a flutter in her chest after a smile at church. It's such a beautiful human moment, and it's the one that kicks off the whole next chapter of her life. So Anna and John got married in 1804, and they started building their life together. This next period for her would be defined by one thing above all else, just incredible growth. 9, that's the number. That's how many children they would have together. Now, in an era with no modern medicine, where childbirth was so risky and so many infants didn't survive, that number alone is just staggering. It speaks to a life that was absolutely filled to the brim. For a quarter of a century, this was the rhythm of her life, an almost constant cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, and raising infants, toddlers, and young kids all at the same time. You can just imagine. Her world was a constant whirlwind of family. And you know what? She describes it as pure joy. Despite all the immense work, she looked back on these as the happiest years of her life. You can just feel the vibrant, chaotic, loving energy of her home in those words. But that happiness, it was about to be shattered. Every life has turning points, right? But for Anna, this one wasn't a turn, it was a seismic shift. One single day was about to redefine her entire existence and set her on a path she never, ever could have imagined. January 16th, 1831. The day probably started just like any other, but it would end in catastrophe. Her husband, John, fell suddenly and violently ill. And within hours, he was gone. He died at just 51 years old. And just like that, Anna's identity was completely upended. One moment, she was a wife and a mother. The very next, she was a widow and the sole provider for her entire family. And the scale of the challenge she faced, it was just immense. She was 44 years old. She had 9 children to care for. And her youngest, Robert, was just a baby, only 8 months old. The responsibility that fell on her shoulders is, well, it's almost impossible to comprehend. And this was the total value of her husband's entire personal estate. $307. That is it. In 1831, with no social safety net, no life insurance, nothing, this was the financial reality she was left with. To raise 9 children. It is a terrifyingly small number.
So, what happens next? I mean, with absolutely everything stacked against her, this is where Anna's real story of resilience begins. Because it's not about what happened to her, it's about what she did next. Her community actually offered to help by taking in some of her children, which was a pretty common and kind thing to do back then. But Anna refused. This was her defiant declaration. Her family would not be broken apart by tragedy. And that single decision, well, it defined everything that followed. So how on earth did she do it? She turned to what she knew.
She took on the hard physical labor of washing and mending clothes for other people. She baked bread and pies to sell. She leaned on her church and community when she had to, of course, but the foundation of their survival was her own relentless, honest work. She simply refused to give up.
And you know what? Anna succeeded. She actually did it. She kept her family together. And as the years went by, she got to experience that bittersweet journey that every parent goes on, watching her children grow up, find their own way, and start families of their own. But her story wasn't without more heartbreak. This chart gives us a quick snapshot of her children's lives. And really, it's a story of incredible success. 7 of her 9 kids married and had their own families, carrying on the line. One daughter, Elizabeth, chose to stay single and made her own way in the world. But then you see that one devastating slice.
Her son, Samuel, was killed when he was just 21 years old. So after everything she'd been through to keep them all safe, she still had to endure the ultimate grief for a parent. Her words here are they're timeless and they're heartbreaking, a pain she carried for the rest of her life.
So, as we get to the end of her story, told in her own words in 1860, we see this old woman looking back on it all. And what she leaves behind isn't wealth or property. It's something so much more valuable. It's wisdom. She basically distilled her 73 years of experience into these 4 powerful principles. For her, family was the absolute anchor. That refusal to be broken apart was her driving force. And hard work, that wasn't just some abstract idea. It meant baking pies to literally put food on the table. Through it all, love was the goal, and faith was the fuel. These were the pillars that held her up.
And this really gets to the heart of it all. For a woman who started with so little and faced such incredible financial struggle, she understood that true wealth was never about money. The real inheritance she fought so hard to protect and to pass down was love.
And that brings us right back to ourselves, doesn't it? Anna's story forces you to look beyond the day-to-day and ask yourself, what are you building? What are you going to leave behind? After all the struggles and all the triumphs, what is the one thing you want to be remembered for? It's a huge question, inspired by a truly powerful life.